Religious extremists use technology to recruit vulnerable individuals to a violent cause. Google is developing ways to combat this extremism through its platforms, namely YouTube. When a user looks for inflammatory religious or supremacist content, YouTube's redirect method instead sends those users towards anti-terrorist videos. Google's fight against extremism compelled writer Lochlan Bloom to write an article called The Coming Battle: AI, Extremism, and the New War of Ideas. Lochlan joins the show to discuss the societal implications of giant internet providers controlling our information flow, for better or worse. Lochlan is a science fiction writer, most recently of The Wave, a book that mixes existentialism with quantum physics. Our reality is defined by what we observe, and this theme courses through our conversation, from religion to Twitter to artificial intelligence. I spend most of my time alone in my home office recording podcasts. Since I work by myself, nobody notices the heavy facial hair. After a few days, I start to look like a werewolf. Eventually, I need to get out into the real world and meet with important business people. That's when I need to get a clean shave. That's when I need Harry's. Harry's gives me the smooth, professional look that I need, with convenience and low price. Try it for free at harrys.com/software. As an engineer, you know the value of clean code, but how about a clean shave? Harry's offers their blades at half the price of the leading 5-blade razor, selling directly to you over the internet. Harry's is so confident that you're going to love their blades that they'll give you their trial shave set for free when you sign up at harrys.com/software. You just pay for shipping, and you get this incredible trial shave set that I've been using with this really nice-smelling shave gel and the 5-blade razor, which gives you a really nice shave. Thanks to Harry's for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily, and check it out at harrys.com/software. That's harrys.com/software. Lochlan Bloom is an author, most recently of the book The Wave. Lochlan, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
We connected because I read an article of yours about AI and extremism, and I want to discuss some of those topics and some other topics around writing and journalism in the age of artificial intelligence, where we're living today. So let's start off by talking about some of the topics that you explore in your article. Describe the difference in the role that religion plays in the secular West and in more religious places in the world. And, for our listeners who are used to software engineering, we will get into the implications of kind of modern day religion.
I should first off state that I'm not coming to this as a software engineer. I studied physics a long time ago now, but the article, the impetus for it was the recent news that Google is looking to tackle extremism online through AI and various other means. So for me, the difference between religion in the West and in other places in the world, it really comes down to the term secular and that separation between the church and state, or between an organized religious societal structure and sort of day-to-day running of infrastructure and so on. And I think you can see quite clear differences in the way that societies operate in different parts of the world. It's not necessarily just making the West secular and other parts non-secular. I think, there's parts of the West that are very much non-secular, and other parts of the world that are secular. But where the day-to-day operation of society is controlled by religious ideas, it just naturally leads to different outcomes and different behaviors from people, because the limits of freedom and the permissible activity are automatically changed depending on whether there's freedom to express a opposing religious view or not.
Do you think that the difference in the degree to which religion is widespread in a given culture, how heavily is that influenced by the degree to which technology and the newest technology available permeates that culture?
Well, I think in this sort of secular West, I'm speaking from London, and I get the same impression from sort of East Coast US and places where technology is quite prevalent and quite sort of embedded in society. I think there's a general sort of sense that the more that technology is taken up by society, the more that these sort of old-fashioned ideas of religion and traditions will sort of just naturally fade away. And I mean, certainly if you look at the sort of Christian tradition in Western Europe, there has been some sort of interplay between the Industrial Revolution and the technologization of society that has followed that over the last sort of 200 years, and a sort of steady ebbing away of control from the church. But I don't feel that those two things are necessarily linked, and going forward there's not necessarily any intrinsic connection between more adoption of technology and less power to religious control.
So somebody like me, I don't know about your history, but I have never lived in a culture where religion is viewed as deeply intermingled with the society. I've lived in America my entire life. I've never visited one of these places. And I think that there are certain places in the world where religion plays a really, really big role in just everyday life. And the difference in cultures between a more secular culture where religion does not play a role in everyday life and a culture in which it does play an everyday role, my sense is that this causes a deep lack of understanding and lack of empathy of the other culture, whichever point you're standing at. What kinds of problems does that disparity in how religion is a part of society, what kinds of problems does that lead to?
Well, I mean, I think you can see the different problems that are appearing in different ways in different places in the world. In terms of what's sort of happened in recent years, you can see, for instance, in Turkey recently, there's been quite a rapid change from a secular society to what appears to be a lot more conservative religious society, and as friction between two opposing viewpoints on how society should be structured grows, there is naturally going to be sort of flashpoints. I think when you're looking at a large mass like a country scale organization, and a sort of fundamental difference in perception on how society should be ordered, whether people should be free to have a religious perspective that they choose, or whether the society should be more homogenous. Those are quite different viewpoints, and when you try to join those together within a bigger structure, then I think you can have flashpoints, and as has happened in various places around the world, this can sometimes lead to violence, or can lead to very sort of rapid change in the way that the previously stable systems have sort of fallen apart or changed.
Mm-hmm. So from my point of view as a secular Westerner, I might conclude that religion is this idea that is basically tied to more primitive impulses, and religion was just the thing that kind of took us from people that were acting in extremely small groups, or just in tribal groups, or just acting as individuals. Religion was just the first binding idea that got people to operate together in large groups, and ultimately it's going to be a fossil in our advancement as a large culture. So, a secular Westerner might conclude that all religion is going to eventually go towards steady, harmless decline, and this is going to go away. We're just going to move towards a time when everybody is secular. Do you think that's a rational conclusion, or is there an alternate conclusion where religion, the amount of religion in the world stays the same or even grows?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly a possibility, that viewpoint. I wouldn't by any means say that was a certainty or an inevitability at all. I think there's lots of factors that sort of drive people towards religious thoughts and experiences, and it's not purely tied to sort of a subsistence level need to have a cohesive society. I mean, that is certainly, it seems to be a factor in some smaller societies, but I think the urge to have some kind of higher consciousness or to move towards some understanding of existence that it incorporates elements more than just the mechanistic operation of the world around us is something that is quite inherent for a lot of people. So to completely remove that from people's lives is quite a tall order. And if you then balance that against the fact that, you know, the majority of people on the planet today subscribe to a faith, and from projections, it looks like the proportion of people subscribing to a faith may in fact be increasing rather than decreasing. The outlook is, I would feel, not too likely that there will be that gradual attrition, but rather the opposite. There's almost a situation where more fuel can be put on the fire to religiousize people, if that's a word, to
Sure.
evangelize and to promote a particular viewpoint over another as points of friction or tension multiply.
Right. And the reason I'm setting the stage here is to illustrate that a secular future is not a foregone conclusion. I think a lot of people in technology in particular kind of assume that just, you know, the more evolved of an intellect you are, the more secular you are. And, you know, I'm not going to debate that or discuss that, but one way or another, it's not a foregone conclusion that there is going to be less religion in the future. And I think this is a good way to segue into the discussion of Google putting more work into combating extremism, because, you know, I think extremism is often a product of when people don't really have anything else in their life but religion. Their circumstances are such that, you know, their reality is sometimes like a living hell, and kind of the only way to frame their outlook optimistically, or the easiest way to frame their outlook optimistically, is kind of through the eyes of religion. And the combination of sets of religious beliefs and an extremely bitter outlook on the world that's kind of justified if you get born into a living hell, you know, turns you into something towards extremism. But Google, what is Google doing to combat extremism?
Okay, so I have to confess, I'm not coming at this as a software engineer. So my understanding of what they're doing, the most recent announcement, which was kind of my impetus at looking at this topic, is that they'd announced that they're using AI and the various means that they've developed in targeted advertising to look through the YouTube content and identify users that are at risk of radicalization, identify content that may be used in the process of radicalization, and then to flag that up and to work with human operators to refine this AI and improve the way that they can identify essentially vulnerable individuals that are vulnerable to radicalization online. And then I guess they will either share that information with the police or try to steer the users' content consumption towards anti-extremist views or anti-extremist content.
Do you think that this is a plausible way of fighting extremism? Can extremism be combated through manipulating the information flows?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is absolutely... I mean, you just need to look at a company like Google that has, in the space of not very many years, risen to being one of the most powerful companies in the world. And essentially their entire business model is based on manipulating data flows and understanding their users' psychological desires and needs and reacting to those to produce content, or not produce content themselves, but to serve them content that entices them to carry on using their service. I mean, I think if you look at any of the sort of major internet companies today, all of them are playing the same game, which is to capture users' attention. And to be able to do that, to capture a user's attention and to increase the amount of time on site or time in app or whatever metric the company uses to monitor their users, what they have to be able to do is be really adept at manipulating the user psychology to make them always want a little bit more. So they always click through to that next page or scroll down to that next article. And for me, I think that very same process, when powered even more strongly by artificial intelligence algorithms, can absolutely be used to sway users either away from extremist content or and this is the issue that is concerning, or could be used in the reverse way to sway users towards the extremist content.
Spring Framework gives developers an environment for building cloud-native projects. On December 4th through 7th, Spring One Platform is coming to San Francisco. Spring One Platform is a conference where developers congregate to explore the latest technologies in the Spring ecosystem and beyond. Speakers at Spring One Platform include Eric Brewer, who created the CAP theorem, Vaughn Vernon, who writes extensively about domain-driven design, and many thought leaders in the Spring ecosystem. Spring One Platform is the premier conference for those who build, deploy, and run cloud-native software. Software Engineering Daily listeners can sign up with the discount code SEDaily100 and receive $100 off of a Spring One Platform conference pass, while also supporting Software Engineering Daily. I will also be at Spring One reporting on developments in the cloud-native ecosystem. I would love to see you there and have a discussion with you. Join me December 4th through 7th at the Spring One Platform conference and use discount code SEDaily100 for $100 off of your conference pass. That's SEDaily100, all one word, for the promo code. Thanks to Pivotal for organizing Spring One Platform and for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Yeah, well, I wonder who are the people that they're going to sway? Because I can imagine, so I've heard of these like Westerners, like kid in his basement, 18-year-old American kid. I think this was in America, but just like, normal kid growing up, read enough extremist content on the internet about, this was Al-Qaeda, I think, or ISIS or something, to inspire him to go off and like fight for ISIS, like make his way over to some combat zone and fight for essentially extremist organization. And I think like a solo actor like that is somebody who's pliant, and maybe Google, by serving them some different YouTube videos instead of the extremist ones that they're searching for, they could sway them. But the large swaths of extremist people who are organizing in these living hells, like I said, I can't imagine these people really being meaningfully impacted by seeing like a different YouTube video when they were searching for the latest extremist content.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely there's different reasons why people would subscribe to a particular worldview. And if you're living in the middle of a war zone, say, it's not a question of being swayed into thinking about guns or bombs or fighting. It's a daily occurrence, and you're either going to have to pick up a gun and do something, or sit there and be sort of blown up. So that's a very different situation from somebody sitting in Idaho somewhere and having no threat whatsoever and deciding to get on a plane and go to Syria and get involved in armed warfare. But I think there are also shades of manipulation, from fully radicalizing someone who has no connection to Syria to fly there and start fighting, to manipulating people to be pro or anti a particular campaign. And I think this is taking place not just within the sphere of religion, but there's lots of discussion of how much the recent US election, for instance, how much that was swayed by hacking or manipulation of social media. There is, a similar sort of concerns in play there, that it's not necessarily a case that somebody might be fully radicalized, but if it's just enough of a manipulation to tip the balance in favor of a particular outcome, that in some cases that might be enough to enact quite a major change in say a country.
Yeah. So to that point, part of the thrust of your article is that these types of tools, the manipulation of information flow, these could potentially get democratized, and extremists could get control of these kinds of tools. And when I was reading that, I was like, well, they already have. And that's what happened in this election. I mean, what I've seen much more evidence of than hacking, and maybe, I'm not going to debate whether or not there was hacking, because I honestly don't know. But what there surely was really crafty use of highly targeted Facebook ads. And I think it's strange that there is not more commentary on this. I mean, people talk about fake news, but what is not fake is if I send a paid advertisement that is essentially, just paid promoted content to an extremely targeted audience that I'm trying to essentially radicalize. And this is a democratized tool for controlling what people think. I don't blame Facebook for it, and I think Facebook has taken a hard look at themselves, but I do think it's strange that there's not more discussion around this completely legal yet unequivocally dangerous way of inserting information into somebody's reality. There's not as much discussion of this as there is of this kind of malicious hacking that may or may not have occurred, that we don't have really kind of great public understanding of. It's much easier to understand, okay, if I pay for Facebook ads to be promoted and I insert commentary about Hillary Clinton being a lizard and having a secret lizard family that she's going to put in the White House basement if she gets elected president. It seems like this should be a much easier thing to have a conversation about, and yet nobody's having a conversation about it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That change between a discussion about hacking, which obviously that is a separate issue, and if it is proven, that is something that people should be concerned about as well. But the very plain and straightforward process of just manipulating millions of people through targeted content, that is a lot more pervasive and a lot more dangerous, I think, in the long run. And I think there's the two different aspects of that. In most of the discussion I've seen anyway of the recent election, it seems to be suggested that it was mainly sort of not entirely manually done, but it was mainly targeting groups of individuals to try and kind of sway them one way or another towards one political party or the other. But there was not much evidence that there were AI algorithms behind this trying to target individuals or understand what individuals were doing. And from my understanding of the sort of improvements in machine learning, I think that is the next sort of stage, the next election maybe, or the one beyond that, the power to be able to sort of drill down to an individual and understand, or for the machine learning algorithm to understand that person's desires and fears at a very deep level, a level almost deeper than the person themselves understands, or certainly than their close friends or family. Once that power is readily targetable into a campaign, then there's really very little that an individual can do to withstand that, because obviously if you're receiving content that is specifically targeted to your own deepest desires and fears, it's going to be very hard for you to resist that and not read it and click on it. You know, where when Google is trying to work out what sort of trainers you might like and throws up an ad showing you a pair of trainers, you may think, oh, those look really good, I want to buy them. But at some point, somewhere in your brain, you realize as well, this is an advert for Google. I'm going to ignore that. I don't need another pair of trainers and move on. Whereas if you see content that seems to relate to your deepest kind of spiritual level and is telling you, or seems to be portraying a path towards a more fulfilled life, it's going to be hard for anybody to ignore that and not click through. And I think that is then the area where there's potential for competing interests to start a sort of arms race in capturing people's attention and capturing specifically people's attention to do with their own personal progression and development.
Yeah, the imaginary example that I think of is, like, let's say like Coke and Pepsi are competing to get me as a customer, and they're both trying to make the best. Let's say they're both trying to make the best computer generated advertisement for me. And Coke, makes a great ad about figures out, okay, I love my mom, just like, any normal or most people have a good relationship with their mom, or at least they love their mom. And so Coke makes a computer generated advertisement of my mom, serving a Coke to a computer generated image of me. And I'm like, wow, that really makes me want a Coke. It really makes me have a strong affinity for Coke. And then I see an ad for Pepsi, and it's like a computer generated simulation of some girl that Facebook has detected, I probably have a crush on this girl, given my behavioral interactions with her content on Facebook. And I'm like, wow, well, that's even more compelling. Now I really want a Pepsi. And, and that's kind of like a trivial example, and that's like where we're going to go. But then you imagine, okay, so what would the political parties be motivated to do? I mean, what on earth would they be capable of doing? And so do you have any ideas for, are there limitations that these companies, the ethical limitations that these companies should be putting on themselves, or putting on the content, or putting on the degree of targeting? Or I guess your article was more of a open-ended like commentary rather than an idea about preventative measures.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the steps that Google have announced were the kind of preventative measures within that sphere of religious radicalization, and you can see the rationale for Google taking these steps. They've got a platform, YouTube, that serves up countless billions of hours of content, and their primary purpose is to create revenue and continue creating revenue into the future. So if they see something that could potentially be quite damaging to their brand, for instance, having people radicalized and killing other people due to content on YouTube, they naturally would seek to limit that. And as they've done, they've implemented this program to identify people that are vulnerable and then flag them up and try to steer them away from radicalization. I think once it's broadened out to the sort of scenario you described, where you've got a Pepsi versus Cola, and they're both fighting for your attention, but not just over buying a soft drink, but over the sort of person you're going to be and the sort of person you want to be. I don't see how it's even feasible to put any limits on that, other than living in a society that has a very draconian conservative outlook and says that this is, everyone acts and thinks the same, and if you if you diverge from this, then you're breaking the law, and you have your head chopped off. As soon as you allow freedom of choice and expression, people will naturally use the tools at their hand to spread their viewpoint. And I think one of the points I was getting at in the article is once organized religious groups with serious funding behind them figure out the power of artificial intelligence and the power to really deeply connect with individuals all around the world, then I can't see any rational situation where a well-funded religious group wouldn't use that power to try and convert as many people as possible to their particular point of view. And that is the concern for me. The concerning issue is when you have, rather than Coke and Pepsi fighting over selling a Coke, you have two large religious organizations fighting over the conversion of, say, unbelievers. There's a lot of fuel for conflict there, I think, potentially.
Well, it does seem like Facebook and Google are taking ideological stances that, they're just saying, okay, well, with these kinds of people, they're just going to filter out the kinds of submissions that they're going to make, right? I mean, aren't these kinds of extremist attempts to sway public opinion, the ones that are unabashedly associated with unabashedly kind of, like the KKK. Like I can't imagine Facebook allowing the KKK to run advertisements on Facebook, and that's within Facebook's right as a giant, well-established platform. So are you saying that you think there are risks of these extremist organizations just sneaking past the filters, or you think that these giants like Google or Facebook would just allow this kind of material to be propagated?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a continuum of offensive content, or there's a continuum of content of all sorts. And if you look at something like the KKK, it's sort of white supremacist, quite extremist organization. That is, Facebook is not going to allow those posts onto their site. But I mean, I don't know the full sort of media landscape in the States, but there certainly seem to be a lot of less extreme versions of the same ideology pushed through sort of maybe more, not mainstream, but not the sort of organization that would get flagged up by Facebook, for example. So
you're talking about Breitbart.
Breitbart, for example, is the one that springs to mind. I'm sure there's others. And, you could easily imagine organizations like Breitbart pushing a very similar agenda to the KKK in a different way, but managing to sway quite a large proportion of the population's opinion, even if it's only to nudge that opinion one notch towards the way they see things. That is a significant change. And if that is being done programmatically, then all they need to do is pour more money into bigger servers, and they can move it 2 notches towards that direction. You see what I mean? It becomes an arms race, because it's not about people face to face evangelizing and saying, well, I'm a white supremacist and I think this, and I've got this crazy view and I've got that crazy view. It becomes about whoever has the best AI systems and the most power to target as many people. And obviously there are limits to that. Somebody's not just going to open their browser, see something and instantly be radicalized or taken to an extremist point of view because there's a lot of funding behind getting an advert shown to them. But if over a period of months and years, there's a continued pressure to move people's awareness and people's prejudices one way or another, then I think there definitely seems to be evidence from the way that the internet companies have grown and the way they operate that can be done, and it can only, the speed at which it can be done and the effectiveness of it is only likely to improve from what I can see.
Cloudflare runs 10% of the internet. boosting the performance and security of millions of websites. Many of you probably already use Cloudflare on your sites, but we're not talking about using Cloudflare today. We're talking about building on top of it. If you're a developer, you can build apps which can be installed by the millions of sites which rely on Cloudflare. You can even sell your apps. They can make you money every month. Your users can log in or register to your service inside your app. They can get a real-time preview of your tool live on their site, and they can start paying you monthly, all from within Cloudflare apps. They can go from never having heard of you or your service to having it installed on their site and paying you in seconds. Visit cloudflare.com/sedaily to watch how you can build and deploy an app in less than 3 minutes. That's cloudflare.com/sedaily. Thank you to Cloudflare for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. You're imagining an organization that has the tech savvy of the tech and media savvy of like a BuzzFeed, but the extremism of an ISIS or a KKK. And I was asking if you think that there is enough of an overlap between tech savvy and extremism. Like, are there people in these extremist organizations that would be tech savvy enough to actually adopt these tools and use them effectively?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, my sense is there probably isn't. But I would imagine that would change, and that can change quite rapidly as people within the sort of more extremist organizations realize the potential there. Then it's not hard for people to learn these skills. And I'm not convinced that, as we were talking earlier, that purely the use and learning of technology is enough to dissuade people from any kind of crazy thoughts. I think it's certainly becoming easier. It seems to be becoming easier to harness the power of AI and to do so in a more user-friendly way, I guess. You don't necessarily need to get so deep into the tech to be able to have a system up and running that can be really quite powerful in the way that it analyzes and understands users. And I mean, I think that also comes issue of how much anybody understands the AI. I mean, it is able to target these desires and fears within users, but that's not to say that the people that program it necessarily need to or want to. As long as it achieves the outcomes that it's set to achieve, then whatever is happening within the black box of the servers it's in a sense irrelevant. If it's turned loose on a user base of 10 million users and within 2 months it has managed to get 5% of those people to click on a specific link or move towards whichever metric the people behind the organization want it to move towards, then how it did that or what its understanding through the statistical analysis of the users is in a sense irrelevant. It's done what it's meant to do, which is fundamentally different from a situation where you have people trying to evangelize and they have a particular belief about the way the world is, and they're trying to convince people through natural language and speaking to people essentially. Or it may be you have an extremist who's working at Breitbart and sits down and tries to write an article that will explain why their worldview is right, but they're doing that in a desire to connect with other human beings through written language, and that is not the way that an AI is going to approach the problem. It's going to look at the data set and work out the best way to achieve its aims, whatever those should be.
Yeah, and I think one analogy you could draw is WordPress is not very hard to use these days. Like, certainly there are extremists out there that are setting up WordPress blogs, and that's where AI is going to be in 5 or 10 years. Like the AI that's, or even shorter, the AI that's today is somewhat hard to configure and hard to build. It's going to be put into easy to use user interfaces where you just kind of state your intentions and the AI will will do the work, will do the difficult plumbing for you. So it's not hard to imagine this stuff being democratized from my point of view. I want to ask you about writing, because you're an author. I used to have some aims to become an author. Eventually I gave it up, in part because I came to the conclusion that the world is just getting so crazy and it's moving so fast. And maybe it's always felt this way, but I just came to the conclusion that you can't write interesting fiction these days, because there's no way that you could even come close to matching reality or competing with the absurdity of reality. How do you write interesting fiction or worthwhile fiction these days when the real world is so crazy?
I think that's a very good point in terms of the amount of crazy stuff. It seems almost on a daily basis there's something that you think that would have made a great film, or maybe it will make a great film in a couple of years' time. And the number of sort of crazy coincidences or crazy stories you read is definitely growing. I mean, for me, the whole kind of process of writing fiction is in a way really to kind of question which parts of those reality are kind of real, what that kind of means really. I mean, most of my fiction is not, I guess I don't write a lot of sort of social realism, so I'm not, or kind of thrillers. It's more, I guess, literary fiction is a genre. I don't like the name of the genre, but more looking at how fiction itself works. And I think, I mean, for me, the interesting thing is how we relate to reality rather than what necessarily is happening in reality at the moment. And that, in a large sense, I'd say the way that we relate to reality is through language and through words, essentially. Our identity, our sense of self, if you look at most of the evidence from modern neuroscience, we have a sort of experiencing self, which is sort of the operation of our body. And there's also this narrating self or narrative self that is, in some sense, some sort of real scientific sense, is a fiction. It's not something we can locate to a particular part of the brain or to any particular process that's happening in the brain. It's something that seems to be created after the event. When we look back on a holiday we had last year, we have a sense, we remember it, we feel that was ourselves there and embodied in that place. But when we remember it in 5 years' time, the way we remember it will be different, and the way we understand ourselves is constantly changing, but in retrospect. And that is, for me anyway, intrinsically tied into our use of language. I think without language, then the people that we think we are would be very different. I mean, we'd be essentially not conscious. I don't see any way that we could have the same consciousness anyway that we have without having discovered or invented, or at some point language coming into existence thousands of years ago, and then the process since then of developing that and creating a culture and society that's intrinsically based on these interactions and speech and written language. So for me, it's kind of fascinating to write fiction, to try and understand for myself essentially what things are real and which things are not real, and to kind of dig a little bit deeper into what part of the language is something that is merely illusory and it can pass, and what is really tying into something deeper.
Yeah, your writing overlaps physics and fiction. So you have a background in physics and you write fiction, and you play with these themes of what is the dividing line between observation and reality. And I don't know much about physics. I failed physics in high school. But from what I know, there's something like, you can't really say things conclusively about what you're observing, or things change just as because you're observing it. And this is basically at extremely low level of science, is observation changes the reality. things that we would like to say are objectively true. Well, the reality is more like we have a probabilistic understanding of it. Like there's like a X% chance this is true, or this is actually two things at once, or this represents like a fork of the universe that goes in like 11,000 different directions. And I think it sounds like the allegory you're drawing between that modality of physics and our understanding of reality is that writing and communication is like a subjective translation from whatever reality is to something that is like one or two steps removed from that reality. It's an observation, which is not the same thing as a objective reality. Tell me more about how you explore, if I've got your themes right, how you explore those themes through your writing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The sort of parallel between physics as a sort of means through mathematics, essentially, of exploring what is real around us, and language as another means of exploring things in a slightly different way, and within a different realm of the actual qualia or the phenomenon that you're looking at. I think when you're looking at the world through the lens of physical experiment, you're really trying to narrow things down and get specifics on as few variables as possible, ideally, and within that to determine one way or another what the outcome is from your experimental apparatus. I think as you alluded to, at the basic level, the quantum picture of the world, this seems to break down, and there are numerous different sort of takes on how this can all be tied up philosophically, but it's not really a one clear-cut resolution to this. And so you do have things like observation collapsing the wave function, or multiple worlds, or you have sort of non-local realist theories that say that there's guiding wave that is non-locally operating behind the manifestations of things in the real world. And like all those kind of philosophical concerns can be quite distanced from the day-to-day operations of carrying out an experiment in a laboratory. It's unless you're specifically looking at the minutiae of quantum operation, most experiments carry on in an everyday way without need to resort to that. And I think equally with language, generally we use it every day without thinking, and nobody really has a crisis of confidence going to order a bacon sandwich in a shop or to order a coffee. It just works. But when you try to sort of focus in a smaller level, there is something very unusual happening with language, that we somehow conjure up this sense of a self, and the words and the processes of language that we use to describe ourselves, in a sense, a lot of the time that is how we feel we are as ourselves. But obviously we don't have any, there's no place that a word exists or a concept exists. It's something in the mind, and that hard problem of consciousness of joining the sort of mechanistic operations of the world around us with this feeling of selfhood and consciousness and being alive at this moment. I mean, that is something that is not, it's not been solved through physical approach, and it's not been solved through a natural language approach, but there seem to be tantalizing hints through both approaches of the sort of edges of that problem, and getting to the edges of that is, for me, that's what's interesting about writing.
It seems like these days we have quite a disagreement about certain ground truths. Like it's certain aspects of certain areas of society just have very fundamental disagreements about the ground truths of reality. And I don't know if we had more agreement in the past when there was less information. If I'm not articulating this well, but just if you go on Twitter, you can just find people who are observing reality in dramatically different ways, observing the same reality. Do you think this is healthy for a society that we have like disagreement about ground truths these days, or like is it healthy, or is this like are we unraveling our shared understanding of what we kind of like the threshold where our society does not separate at the seams? Like are we nearing that threshold, or are we just having healthy disagreements?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly some of the disagreements you see online, especially, I'd say they go beyond being
Like
healthy disagreements.
There are lots of flat earthers online.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Well, it's hard for me to really get on board with anything in that sort of worldview. I mean, there is for me there is that sort of there is a balance between being open to other views and sort of quite a lot of weight in the idea of free speech and the right to say whatever you want, however crazy it might be, and not be tied to some societal norm that forces you to do things a certain way. At the same time, when these conflicts and tensions lead to mass violence or mass upheaval for a majority of people, there are, I mean, those are issues that need to be tackled, and I think on a case-by-case basis where those are seen to be bubbling up into something bigger, then people within those bubbles need to decide how they want to act. I mean, if you look at the history of mankind, there's numerous wars and conflicts that have differences of opinions that to us today seem completely insane and bizarre. A tiny difference in a reading of a scripture in the Catholic Church could lead to years and years of conflict, and a few hundred years ago. And now we look back, we don't struggle really to understand what that difference was, or how it could even be possibly, how anybody could think that was an important thing to fight about. But at what point you and who is to step in to say, okay, that enough is enough. Everybody has to get on this page about what's going on. I think that's a very difficult question to answer in general.
So we're up against time. I want to come full circle and ask you about one other question relating to religion. So I read Homo Deus recently, which is Yuval Noah Harari's newest book, and one of the things he explores in this book is the idea that, or maybe he might have just discussed this in some other interviews that I heard around the time of his book release, the idea that there is going to be some new religions that develop in the secular, or the currently secular West, religions around technology. I don't know. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Do you think that the current atmosphere, because there are people who are so fervently technologically optimistic. I mean, I might put myself in this camp. I'm a techno optimist. I think we can solve all or most of our problems through the invention and adoption of technology. And the degree to which I sometimes radically disagree with others who are not techno optimists does make me feel almost a sense of religious fervor sometimes. Do you think that technology has supplanted religion for the secular West, or do you think that the current technological atmosphere is a foment for a new religion?
I think there's going to be elements of both of those viewpoints. I think the religions that are in the world today are going to evolve or change quite rapidly and quite distinctly as new ways of connecting with people become more readily available. I think there is some credence to the sort of technology itself being a religion, but I think for most people the idea of religion comes to their own personal existence and ways for them to reach some kind of higher state of being. And if you look through the numerous, countless religions that have been invented until now, there's obviously lots of different ways that preachers or religious leaders have sought to kind of push people's buttons and convince them of their way of seeing things. I think what is going to fundamentally change is once AI is introduced into the mix, what it is doing is fundamentally different. And AI, as far as all the evidence shows so far, is not conscious, and it's not close to being conscious anytime in the foreseeable future. What it's very good at doing is intelligently analyzing large data sets and finding essentially the contours of a particular data landscape. And if that data set happens to be human interactions, human behaviors, it's capable of finding the contours of individual desires, wants, and targeting information to relate to that. So I think what is likely to happen is that as existing religious organizations or newly formed religious organizations as well, as organizations with a fundamental agenda, rather than a corporation that's seeking to make money, where you have an organization whose agenda is to push a particular religious viewpoint, as they come to realize the power of AI and put effort and resource into that, these AIs will start to build a picture of how they can best evangelize or convert people. And there's going to be a feedback loop as a, say, the Southern Baptist Church, as they put money into evangelizing their particular brand of Christianity, they're going to get feedback of, okay, well, this is really not sticking with people. This particular point is not working, but this is really going well. And there's going to be a natural change. There's going to be internal tension within religious organizations to expand through ways that they can see are effective and to hold to certain core principles. And some of those religions are going to say, no, we're sticking to these core principles. If this program is not effective in converting people, then we don't care. We're sticking to this as it is. Other organizations are going to go, well, they're going to see the opportunity and change to adapt to what seems like an opportunity to convert, say 1 million people. And those organizations that are successful at that are going to get more revenue. And if they plow that back into further evangelism, then there's potential that they can grow quite rapidly. And the ultimate form of that religion may be quite different from anything we see today. It might be a whole new religion, and it's not that the AI has created it on its own. It's just been following step-by-step iterations from the people that have been directing it. But ultimately, in 50 years' time, it may be so effective at understanding how people tick that the religion it's very hard for people to resist. And who knows what shape that religion will be, but it certainly seems a possibility that something along those lines may happen in the coming years.
Well, Lochlan, it's been great talking to you, and I haven't read any of your books or your short stories. I'm sure they're good. What I can say for sure is that you have clear and well-phrased commentary on our current reality and some probabilistic futures that we might be stumbling into. So, if nothing else, I would love to see more of those, your types of writing.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's been an interesting conversation.
Thanks to Symphono for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symphono is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symphono.com/sedaily. That's symphono.com/sedaily. Thanks to Symphono for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily for almost a year now. Your continued support allows us to deliver content to the listeners on a regular basis.
Wow.